Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're listening to this Two Tokens podcast. I'm here with Arie and with Dennis, and they're going to introduce themselves later on. And we're going to talk about the Empowering Communities working group that Two Tokens facilitated over the last year. And I hope you enjoy this podcast and listen to all the others. The aspects we're going to talk about are tax and legal, and Arie is a legal expert. So Arie, please introduce yourself.
Yes, thanks very much. So my name is Arie van Bergen. I'm a lawyer at Finnic Legal, and I specialize in helping out FinTech companies with legal and regulatory advice. That also includes license applications, and I have a specific interest in blockchain and crypto, which is also why I attended the Two Tokens masterclass, Token Economy, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about that later.
Great, thank you. And Dennis.
Hi, Dennis Post. I'm a tax partner with EY. I've been involved with blockchain and crypto since 2016-17, basically, and now responsible within the EMEA region for everything Web3 related, from blockchain to crypto to NFTs to metaverse to tokenization of real world assets and what have you. I'm also a researcher at the University of Amsterdam, where I basically do research about all these topics from a tax perspective. So,
and in 2016 you started. Is that personal interest, or is that a thing
Absolutely.
that came from EY?
It started with personal interest, and then all of a sudden I thought, we need to do something with this, from a professional perspective. And then you start, exploring, start making some phone calls. You start real small and then hope to expand it over the years. And I think we've done quite well there.
And within EY, you've got a background there a long time ago as well. But a big company, a lot of different viewpoints on everything. And how is that with Web3?
That's an interesting one. Obviously, we have a tendency to jump on all the hypes that are out there, as we do now with Gen AI. With blockchain, we also jumped on the bandwagon. Crypto was way too sensitive back then, simply because there were lots of ICO scams, as you may recall. But we see the market maturing. We see the parties that are maturing. We've also, managed to get our own internal guardrails when we do client onboarding and stuff like that. So it's maturing on the way we deal with it. It's maturing with the parties that we work with. And that said, there's always a tendency that we focus on, one hype versus the other. I'm personally really advocating that, Web3 will not go away. We can jump to any other curve that you want, but this will not go away. This will stay. So let's continue to focus on it.
Okay.
Dennis, may I ask you a question?
Yes.
Do you also see a change in the attitude towards blockchain and crypto over time? Because from my personal experience, I was at the time working at Knap, an online bank. And I remember, I think it was back in 2018, that Knap had a lot of people who started to invest in crypto and do business, also clients, and they wanted to know, well, what should we do with it? And at the beginning, they had a very rigid approach, like it's all very risky and sensitive. So let's not facilitate those companies.
Mm-hmm. And those trades, even individual trades, were rolled back, right?
Yes. And then we had also our small masterclass with some experts from legal compliance and the business to talk about it, and we were introduced with how it works and notes and everything, and no one knew a lot about it. And I think now that the crypto is going to be regulated, the approach of financial institutions is also changing. I was wondering how you see that.
Yeah, well, I think it's an absolutely valid point, because we see over time that, and obviously regulation has done a lot in that sense, that our perspectives are maturing and are developing, because obviously in the beginning we are also a regulated firm. EY is a regulated firm, so we also are very mindful that we need to be careful on the parties that we deal with. We need to make sure that everything that is happening for which we provide assurance or advice, that is all being dealt with in a careful way. But I definitely see, I wouldn't call it a paradigm shift, but over the years, the market is maturing, regulation has done a lot. The parties that we're dealing with are becoming bigger and bigger. So from that perspective, I think also the mindset on how we want to deal with that is developing. That's one. And I think obviously in the financial services industry, as you also mentioned, tokenization of assets is one of the hottest topics out there. And we need to see obviously how that develops, but it's definitely here to stay.
And tokenization of assets, it's still quite restricted, right? Not everything is possible. And once a financial instrument is regulated, has been regulated for a long time and still will be regulated for a long time. And now we're looking at real world assets, and depending on the value of that asset, it's still regulated as well. And if you like specific assets like real estate, they have other regulations that restricts them. And then going back to this community part, there, people used to, I would say, collect scrapbooks of theater tickets and football matches and things like that. Communities people will do that now digitally and with I think proof of attendance tokens and things like that, NFTs. You've been in that Empowering Communities working group, Arie.
Yes.
From what perspective? What made you join this working group, and what do you see the big advantage of talking about it and getting that white paper out?
Yes, so as I said, I attended the masterclass Token Economy, and the more you get into the topic, the more interesting it becomes. And then I was approached by Iris, who asked me, well, we're setting up this group to further look into tokenization and loyalty and community tokens. And for me, that was a perfect opportunity to bring everything I learned into practice. And obviously, there's a lot new with crypto, but it's also about the application of existing laws and regulations. So part of it is new, which was in the end MiCA, for example, but a lot of it, like consumer protection or intellectual property or data privacy, is applying existing laws and regulations, which is what I do every day. So from that perspective, it was new, but also just applying existing laws as well.
On a sort of anarchistic system, right? Where tokenization can be seen as where decentralization is in place, where governance is different.
Yes.
You have to, and then you have to go in with these existing rules and regulations. And how does that work?
I think the biggest changes are on the part of regulations, like supervision. That is where most of the changes occur. Also there you have existing security laws and regulations, but they don't cover all of the existing services that are provided. But then you're also entering into contracts with people, companies, which is just like civil law. And that's often forgotten because we're always talking about the regulatory side of it. But most important, there's also like civil law and a tax perspective to it, which is just as important. And particularly if you have new companies that, don't have like the large budgets, it's often like I just take something from the shelf, or people think if they have a smart contract that it's actually a legal and binding contract, which it may be, but often it is actually not.
A lot of the projects and also within the working group, a lot of projects are run by small startups, people that only cover a very limited part of what you would cover in a normal company. And they're not they mostly approach things from a technical side, right? And not from from other sides. So if you look at, and perhaps you can answer that, Dennis, if you look at when people come to you about taxation of their business or even of their tokens, are they, when's that in their process? Is that early? Is that usually too late?
It's never too late, but it's definitely late in the game, and this is understandable because a lot of these initiatives are driven from a business perspective or from a marketing perspective, and then hopefully somebody raises the question, hey, what about tax? Because, if there's anything that people will take away from this podcast is that there's always a tax consequence on tokens. So make sure that you take that into account. But it's typically late in the game. And, I've seen examples where, people were ready to launch the token and they hadn't thought about tax. And that's obviously a big issue then, because it's also a risk if you don't deal with that properly.
Yeah, but the difference is that tokens don't have borders, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so which jurisdiction do you apply on tokenization, on tokens at that very moment? Where's your customer?
It's also a legal question. The same thing occurs.
Yeah.
And what law applies?
Absolutely. And it's a very critical topic because we're, let me say in general, pseudo-anonymity is not a good thing from a tax perspective, right? If you don't know who you're dealing with, you don't know where the transaction takes place, that is complicated from a tax perspective. That's complicated from a VAT perspective, it's complicated from an income tax perspective, it's complicated on how to tax that at all. So luckily, what I see happening is that, we've had, the metaverse, NFT hype in 2021. We saw, also the traditional companies experimenting with tokens as an extension of their marketing and an e-commerce strategy. And obviously in the beginning, that was all like experiments and everybody wanted to take a, piece out of the hype. But they were all, I've also seen some examples, for example, luxury goods, luxury cars brands, where they said, if we can't land on how to deal with stuff from a tax and legal perspective, we're simply not going to do it because it's not worth our reputation at the end of the day. So, and I think that is now shifting a little bit because obviously we have more regulation, we have a little bit more guidance on how to deal with the tax treatment of tokens. So it's moving in the right direction.
And it's sometimes complicated. You got these physicals, right? The physical and the digital product combined, and
yes.
and there it's not really clear.
Yeah, and this is also where it gets really dangerous for me because I'm not a VAT expert, but what I do know, and this is also, so when you're dealing with tokens that are digital and you want to, for example, connect like physical elements to the token or connect to the token, that is a really important item to look at from a VAT perspective, and it has to do with where to tax a transaction, when to tax a transaction with VAT, and the complexity is obviously that sometimes we know from the start and then it's somewhat clear. But in a lot of situations, you see that additional features are added to a token, or characteristics, or
they evolve and
they evolve over time.
Outside of the advice that you have given in.
Yeah, and I think also in that situation, and this
or
is where
distribution models is also part of it. Like you introduce a certain party who does a certain service, and then you also have legal questions and tax questions, I guess, on how to treat that.
Absolutely, and it's very hard because with tax and also I think with legal frameworks, it's always that we're lacking behind. And you see, if we see how the technology is developing so fast, where you have now dynamic tokens that can change from color basically over time, it's complicated to deal with that from a tax perspective.
And if you look at, say, the role of the tax authorities and the directions they are giving to you, is that how are they approaching this market and these?
Well, I have a couple of thoughts on that. So on the one hand is in an international perspective, we see that there is some guidance on how to treat tokens and crypto in general. The problem is that a lot of countries are viewing the tax qualification and the tax treatment of certain transactions in a different way, which obviously in an international context is complex because it could lead to double taxation, it could lead to double non-taxation. So that's complicated. At the same time, I also see, luckily, that, for example, tax authorities in the Netherlands, they're starting to build up knowledge. They have a lot of excited young people that are into the topic. And we've done also a couple of educational sessions there. So it's starting to increase the knowledge there. But I think the knowledge and the capacity building at the tax authorities in every country, essentially, is really something that needs to mature.
And that's the same with the regulators, right? The same with jurisdiction and the way the jurisdiction is seen by the regulators.
Well, in Europe, obviously we have MiCA, which will enter into force for most companies at the end of this year, which means there's a harmonized approach across Europe. But still you see that regulators often take a different position on topics. And unless in the end the European Court of Justice provides a decision on it, or
10 years later.
10 years later, or like ESMA, which is the kind of the overall European regulator coordinating the different regulators, often, negotiates between the different member states, and then in the end publishes a report. So there is obviously some guidance, but still there's often a lot of uncertainty. And if you look at the license requirements, you see that although the list of requirements is the same, the way the regulators treat the application is sometimes completely different.
Mm-hmm. And then the supervision is also different, right?
And the supervision as well, yes.
And the supervision cost, which is, I think, in the Netherlands, a bit more than in some other countries. Let's say it like that.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
How do you look at that? Is that a thing that also will evolve, because we don't want to scare crypto companies or tokenization companies away from our system because of that, right?
Yeah, it's always like a balanced approach, because on the one hand you want to attract companies and do business in your country. On the other hand, you don't want to be too lenient on the requirements, and you don't want to get the bad actors into your jurisdiction. And I think in the Netherlands generally, we're not the most lenient in supervision, which is in itself a good thing. But we should always be careful not to be too restrictive in requirements. And I think in general that the Dutch regulators have a practical approach, so they're open to discussion, but they obviously have their own interest, which is to protect the consumers, and they're not necessarily there to promote the economy or.
True, but shouldn't they also scale that a bit more, like the risk of financial instruments or the risk on ticketing or on community tokens where you build communities is completely different, and they're seen in within the same framework at the moment.
Yeah, that's a fair point. So what you often see is that in all the regulations there's the principle of proportionality, and the regulators, they always say we take that into account, but in practice you often see that the bar is set at a high standard. So even the small companies have to comply to a certain level, of which you can sometimes wonder whether startup companies can actually meet that, and that makes it very expensive to enter the market.
Yes.
Yeah, but if you then, for example, I was reading the column from Laura from Geest from AFM in the Dutch Financial Times earlier this week, and she was advocating a risk-based approach on regulatory regimes, and I was like, well, you may preach that, but you're not practicing it. In this.
But can you practice that? Because do you have enough knowledge to practice that? Not from the people. I mean from the projects. Do the projects always put all their cards on the table so that you know what's happening then, or would they then, if you do that, go and say, oh, we don't tell them this, then?
Yeah, of course, it's a balancing act, and and I'm not a regulator, and I'm just a tax guy, so I don't know how to deal with that. But I do think that, let's say, also to your point, a little bit more flexibility towards innovation, and at the same time, keeping those guardrails in place. That's one approach versus completely shutting off all innovative ideas.
Yeah, and what you see particularly with MiCA is that the regulator doesn't know at the start a lot about how it works in practice, the market standards, etc. So I was at a conference organized by the AFM. I think you were also there.
I was there as well, yeah.
Yes, and what they said is like we have to reach out to each other and learn from each other. I find it then a little bit disappointing when I ask a question to the AFM, I don't get an answer. It's like, well, we're not giving advice. And then I'm thinking like, the regulators should also give guidance to the market. Yeah. And if they don't know, that's fair enough. We can have a discussion on that. So on the one hand, they want to reach out, but then...
They never give official advice. They do say... off the record, give some advice, right? If you
not in this case.
Not in this case, no. Probably because you were in a room with a lot of other people. But I've been in this regulatory situation as well, and working towards an exempt. And their viewpoint is we don't judge what you do until you're on the market, and then we look at it, and if we say it's not compliant, then we'll tell you. But still, in the road towards it, they told us not to do specific things or focus on other things and give some guidance. Yeah.
No, that's true, and it may also be that they're just too busy and they have a small team and everyone comes with the license application. So I'm not saying they're not open to discussion, but I do feel generally that they could give some more guidance to the markets. And that's not just like in an individual case saying, well, off the record, maybe do this and this. But particularly with MiCA, there's so many questions outstanding. Then obviously they need to be coordinated on a European level. But I think a lot of market parties want to have more guidance on what they can do, how they should do it. And actually a good example is that the AFM just gave some guidance on safeguarding of assets. So they do give some guidance, but generally I think the market expects more.
I suppose this was about DORA, I suppose, right? On the Resilience Act that they gave the guidance.
No, this was safeguarding of crypto assets. Okay.
But can I ask you a question? Because I completely agree with that, right? But I also think that if you look at ESMA, I thought that I read somewhere that a while back they were exploring or they were writing like a taxonomy for NFTs, for example. And obviously that is one of the critical items. If you look at MiCA and also if you look at how to treat that from a tax perspective, can we not agree on like an overarching taxonomy, if you will, on if you have certain characteristics, then this is how we deal with it. We currently don't have that, and I think that's lacking in MiCA currently.
But then the question is it like a technical standard, right? If it has these technical requirements, because often the legal and the technical aspects are different. Mm-hmm. To take the NFT as an example, so
there's no NFT in MiCA, right? It's not. It's not mentioned at all because MiCA, when they wrote it, the NFT was not, or when they started it it because of.
No, but it's not about MiCA, but about securities regulations. Because if it's not tradable, then it's not a security, and the security laws and regulations do not apply. So an NFT usually, technically, there are restrictions, but if you copy a piece of art and you sell it in 1,000 copies, it may still be an NFT, but it may actually be a security depending on the characteristics. So you always have to look at what does it actually do. Is it a utility token? Is it a governance token? Yeah. Is it a security token? And then what makes it more complicated is that the different functions are often combined. And to take the example of a loyalty token, so if I have a certain association or a group of people, I want to decide on and vote on certain topics. That may be a governance token. Then I may want to issue tickets or whatever. I organize an event. Then it may be a utility token. Yeah. And then we may together decide to invest in a house, whatever. Then it may actually be a security. And then the three come together. So, and that makes it complicated.
That's the involvement we were talking on at the beginning.
Yeah, it makes it complicated. But at the same time, right now we have nothing. So can we not start with say, if it has characteristics of this, it's a security token. If it's this, then it's a utility token. And of course, there's always like hybrid models. And I think what we also saw is because so many tokens that were issued were basically, I've seen a lot of examples where parties said this token is based on US SEC standards, for sure a security token. So let's make it a utility token. And then as a next step, they're starting to include characteristics that are more leaning towards the security. So that's, in fact, the hybrid. But, you need to think about a taxonomy or definitions on if it has certain characteristics, we treat it this way. And if there's an element of a security in there, you say, okay, it's all in or all out. But, in any case, give us something.
Mm-hmm. And you're looking for this guidance from ESMA. You're looking for guidance from AFM.
Well, ESMA actually they gave some guidance, and the whole market was waiting for it. It's still a consultation, so I haven't seen the final version. And people were expecting that they would give like yes/no answers, but I guess it's also
it's always the maybe from the.
It depends. Yeah. It depends. Yes,
exactly.
The lawyer's response. Yes,
and I guess the securities laws, it's all very nuanced. So I like the idea, but and I had hoped for a little bit more clear-cut criteria, but I wonder if it's possible to do it this way. What you could have obviously do is to say, well, this is not, and this, and there's a certain group in between, and then this is actually a security or something else. But there will always be a group in between where it really depends, and where
but that's where you come in with your expertise. You say, based on my expertise, I say, it's the same as in the tax world. It's never black and white. It's always a little bit of gray. But then it starts. Does it? Based on all the characteristics, is it more left or more to the right? And then you make a decision. But if you don't have any guidance or guardrails on how to deal with stuff, then it's getting more complicated.
And if you look at tax, so in the tax authorities, right, and guidance by the tax authorities. I'm also part of, co-founder of the NFT Playground here in Amsterdam, where we invited the tax authorities to tell our members about how taxation of tokens works, and especially that's for income tax. They didn't do that. They didn't want to come because they thought that it would be difficult to tell everyone, and people would use their words perhaps against them. I don't know how that works. What's your opinion about the guidance you get from tax authorities in this?
Well, there's not so much guidance, and maybe that also has to do with, let's say, well, I need to be careful with my wording here, but it's not a simple system that we have in terms of income taxation, especially not since last week. But it is let's say we look at what you have in terms of assets on January 1st, right? Right. And a future system will more lean towards like increments in value over time, or more like capital gains taxation. I think the way it stands currently is that all crypto tokens and what have you, it's not a capital gains taxation, which I think is a good thing, because I've seen so many examples where people come to us and say, I've done 150,000 NFT transactions, and can you tell me how to tax that? And I said, well, give me all the data. Well, I don't have that. Yeah. So, but what do you have on January 1st? That's something that is, in any case, somewhat clear. So I don't think we should necessarily go towards a system where we're basically taxing all transactions. But we need to find a practical way based on actually, what is the actual increase in value. So that said, I also think that, so I think there was a research done last year where we said, 2 million people in the Netherlands, they have crypto. Mostly are like, either my son who has like 10 euros, or, somebody that is in any case below the taxation threshold in box 3. So for most people, it's not really a relevant item. But there is also a large group for which it is becoming more relevant. And people that are trying to deal with tokens from a business perspective, as we also saw in several examples. The loyalty tokens, that if you want to embed that into your business model, then I think there we need to have more guidance.
But then the valuation of these tokens is difficult, right?
Yes.
So how do you, if a token is not listed on an exchange, how do you value it on January 1st?
Yeah, what that is, I think, not necessarily unique to tokens, because we've seen that in a lot of instances. If there's not like a market price for something, how do you value that? And also, in all fairness, a lot of discussions with tax authorities are always about valuation of stuff. So you need to come to some sort of mechanism to actually value that. And what would a third party actually pay for that, or be willing to pay for that? That is generally the way that we treat with or deal with those things. But I have to say, with tokens, that is a little bit more complicated with, let's say, other assets.
Yeah, right. So I think that's for most people that own tokens. That's the question, right? I've got tokens in a wallet.
Mm-hmm.
It's a wallet that nobody knows about because it's a non-custodial wallet. What do I do with that?
Yeah, and obviously something is changing because, as I said, tax authorities currently, they lack the information to know whether a person has crypto at all, right? That is starting to change, also starting in 2026, where we have the DAC 8 directive coming our way, which basically means that if I own crypto at a Dutch crypto exchange or any other EU crypto exchange for that matter, they have to give that information to the tax authorities, and they exchange that information.
But then it's in the wallet of the exchange, right? It's in the custodial wallet of the exchange. If
Yes.
you have non-custodial wallets, then difficult.
Yes, it's not capturing that. It's not capturing decentralized autonomous organizations. It doesn't have a proper mechanism on how to deal with NFTs.
This was not tax advice, by the way. So.
No, but of course. So I've talked to some of the people that were very close to on how the OECD crypto asset reporting framework was designed, and that was basically the basis of this DAC 8 legislation coming our way. And they basically said, if you're dealing with so many OECD countries all together, you need to come to a compromise, and you need to come to a compromise with the US, which is always very complicated. So we have a framework. It's far from perfect, but we don't want perfect to be the hostage of good. So it's a starting point. It's probably a little bit more focused towards what crypto exchanges hold for their customers. But we will see future iterations of information reporting where we hopefully tackle more guidance on NFTs, more guidance on non-custodial wallets, more guidance on decentralized autonomous organizations. Hopefully.
Yes, that evolves, and I suppose MiCA also evolves into covering NFTs and the things that are not in there yet.
I think it's just a start. There's a clause in MiCA saying that it will be reviewed after a couple of years. I think the review will start pretty soon, and probably they're going to find more and more to include in MiCA. That is, from my experience, it usually doesn't become less, but more.
And more precise and more defined, I hope.
Yes. I mean, the regulators will also notice things that could be improved or are missing. So they're also learning. And in the Netherlands, we have the AFM and DNB sending a letter to the Ministry of Finance every year saying, well, we want this and this to be included in our legislation. And usually some of those topics are then taken up and implemented in the law. A similar thing will happen on the European level.
And for that, the taxonomies and more clarification on what a token beholds is very important, I suppose. For me,
from a tax perspective, it's crucial. And if you take the topic of NFTs also under DAC 8, we say now, and I think this is based on FIU definitions, it's included in information reporting if it's suitable for payment or investment purposes. Right. But they leave that to the discretionary judgment of the crypto exchange. So you could actually have, in theory at least, you could have crypto exchanges competing on the same token, because one thinks it's suitable for investment purposes and the other one doesn't. So,
and if you have a decentralized exchange, nobody thinks anything about it at all.
No, and then there's no, exactly. On decentralized autonomous organizations, I see definitely a shift that also these organizations are realizing that they need to do something, that they may need to think about a legal wrapper in a certain jurisdiction to comply with legal rules, to comply with tax rules. So that is shifting, but we're not there yet.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I think we're coming to the end of this podcast, and perhaps some famous last words for you, Arie, to conclude what you see happening in the future and what your role would be in the ecosystem of all these very interesting Web3.
Yeah, no, it's always hard to look into the future. I don't have the glass ball to look into. I do see that a lot of things are happening, for example, in DeFi. But it will also be interesting to see what happens if we're talking about loyalty and community tokens, which are often on a smaller scale, right? But in general, I think the tokenization is going to increase. I recently read that MasterCard is announcing that in, I think, 25, they want to have all their payments being tokenized, which is safer, more secure, etc. And I think a lot of companies will follow suit. So at some point, I think probably like the physical cards will disappear, and I'm always paying with my phone, and I don't like to bring cards with me. So I think there's a lot of development there. And on the regulatory side, well, we have to see how the regulator will approach certain topics. There are a lot of things outstanding. And
your role would be?
Well,
what can our listeners call you for?
Yes, well, basically, I can provide legal advice on Web3, on blockchain, on crypto, on tokenization, and a lot of different things come together, right? So as I said, it's civil law aspects, whether it's like privacy or consumer protection or other topics, and the regulation, which is well, some people deem the most important because the supervisor may issue fines, etc. So what I can do is provide like practical advice on, first of all, how do you qualify the assets, draft the contracts, make sure that everything is in order, and then look at the business plan. So how can we best implement our services and put them to the market?
Great, thank you. And if I look at you, Dennis, so we go to these projects again. They call you in a late stage. You want them to be earlier, right?
Call me earlier. Just have a coffee. That's always fine. I think a couple of things where I can and will contribute. Hopefully, also, as a researcher at university, is obviously to help shape the debate and to help us think about what we need to do to hopefully shed some light on some uncertainties that are out there that we see. And then, you said, what can they call me for? As I said earlier, if people take one thing away from my side, let it be that all tokens, all crypto, there is always a tax element. So let's have a chat.
Okay. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for listening to this podcast, this Two Tokens podcast. Please subscribe to our channel and follow us. And you're very welcome, of course, on our events. And you'll find the details on the events on our website. Thank you very much for listening.
That was it for today's podcast. Thank you for listening in, and please subscribe so you don't miss out on our upcoming episodes. If you want to get in touch with us, you can find our contact details at www.twotokens.org.